Sounds good.
Cool. Are you all conferenced out?
I am done for the year. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm gearing up for Code Mash in January.
Oh, fun.
Um, so we will need to update my bio and stuff as well. But my company got acquired, so
Oh,
yeah.
surprise.
So I am now part of Hygiena, and
Huh.
any views I express on this do not express the opinions of my employer. There, I said it.
Do you want me to include that in the
No,
final? Okay.
fine.
I was like, I've never had to do that before, but I will.
Yeah, no, there is. I think it's primarily for social media and stuff. So
We James and I were at a conference. We were at Postman, and Microsoft was there. And we were going around getting short form content and went up to a Microsoft guy and was like, "Hey, do you want to do this?" And he's like, "I can't. Go talk to the DevRel guy. DevRel's allowed to talk to you guys, but I'm not." I was like,
oh,
"Okay." Never had that happen before. Yeah.
that's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that. I have a fun story from Cassidy, but I don't think I can
Oh.
say it here. So we'll talk about it later.
Yeah,
Um,
she's still one of those people that I want to meet in real life. I've never
she's
interacted with
great.
her. Yeah.
She's fantastic.
Yeah.
So
She is number 20 on the list of individual influencers on the state of JavaScript. They released that this week.
yeah, I saw that.
I was like, one, she's underrated, and two, it made me sad that it was like the first female was number 20.
Yeah, yeah. Was there like because I was looking through that and I was like, there's literally that's like the first woman. I kept
Mhm.
going. I didn't like go through all of the like whatever thousand like other
Oh
responses.
yeah.
But like was she the only woman on there?
If you click, I didn't go through the other ones, but it's like if you click more,
Mm-hmm.
it'll expand and show you like five more. And there were
Yeah,
like two more females in that list. I don't remember who they were.
yeah,
But I was like, oh, this is really sad.
yeah,
The other thing that kind of made me just like, what is this? Um, is that a lot of the people that mentioned resources and stuff are CSS resources. I was like, this is the state of JavaScript. Why are they getting
yeah,
like the most prominent spots for JavaScript when I'm like, you don't even talk about JavaScript. And then I'm been guesting on JS Party, and somebody in that group even commented that like under podcasts, several of the people that got the top 2 and 3 spot are people. They're not podcasts. They're people.
yeah, yeah.
It's funny.
Because yeah, I
I
think like Wes Boss was like high on the podcast list, and it's like he, he he's in a podcast, but he's not the
he's not the
podcast.
podcast.
Mm.
We miss you, Brad. See him there. Yeah. So, anyways, whatever. But I will say, do you know Sasha, the guy that runs all the state of stuff, all the surveys?
I do not.
I believe he's in Japan, because whenever I've interacted with him, it's like 12 hours later. But he's fantastic. And I haven't contributed, but I'm part of the group that like on Discord that helps put all that stuff together. And I mean, just incredible time and attention, and the system that he has built on the back end to be able to do all that stuff is really incredible.
Yeah.
So I do want to highlight that any criticism is not a reflection of him. It's more of the reflection of the industry than anything else.
Yeah. And it's a very, especially with like content creation and stuff like that, it's very challenging because it's like, okay, yeah, like the industry skews towards a certain demographic,
Mhm.
and like you can put in people who are not as popular, but then
Yep.
like you're then imparting
Yep.
a like opinion on the thing, but also simultaneously, if you don't do that, you are also imparting an opinion upon the right, like so like
Yes.
which way do you go? So
Yes, 100%. And I mean, like, even we were talking about the male to female ratio.
yeah.
I'm just making things up because I don't know what the actual numbers are. But it's like, okay, if you look at it and you say, well, 10% of the tech industry is female. Well, it's like, yeah, of course, influencers are not going to be 50-50 male female. It's going to be like, if anything, a reflection of that to say like 10% at best of those influencers are female. So sometimes I'm like, I don't feel like it's fair to like complain about the imbalance when it's like, again, it's a bigger reflection of the entire industry than anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It's challenging. I'm not good at that stuff. I know I'm not good at that stuff. Like when you start getting into like statistics and how do you make a survey and how do you make it all that, I have no idea. I have
Crazy.
yeah, like I don't have a college degree. So it's one of those where it's just like I just genuinely don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, like statistics is a whole nother
Yeah.
thing. Yeah. Cool. Do you want to go ahead and get started?
Sure.
The recording? Okay, let's do it. We are right on the money.
Nice.
11 Central. Okay. Brad, you can put all the questions that you wanted to ask Alex if you were here in the chat. So this is going to be fun. By the way, I did ask Claude for recommendations on the title for today's episode, and it gave me a few good puns. Yeah. Is it viewer view? It was like a new view. Oh, so good. All right. Let me cue up the music here. Because otherwise I will be scrambling later. There we are. Okay. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Compressed FM, a podcast all about web design and development and a little bit of zest. In today's episode, we are going to be talking all about React versus Vue.
Web development and design, who would have guessed? Well, we can do them both, even add a little zest. So turn up the volume, get ready for the best. Let's get it started in this episode of Compressed.
Hello, my name is Amy Dutton. I am a lead maintainer on the Redwood JS core team. And today we have Alex. Welcome, Alex.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Alex is my good friend. We've been to several conferences together. We had him on a few weeks ago to talk all about CSS and some of the latest and greatest properties and attributes and all the good CSS stuff. And Alex is also a Vue developer. And so I was like, we need to have you on again to talk specifically about Vue and why you might reach for Vue over React, what Vue has to offer instead of React, and what some of the mental models that are different between React and Vue.
Yeah. I will wait, how long do we have? We only have like an hour or something like that, so I'll have to keep it short. But we can go over all of that. It's great.
Well, maybe let's start there. How did you land on Vue?
Okay, so fun story. I will give a shout out to my former coworker Gray. He and I were working at a web agency together in the same office. Like we were all sort of in like a co-working space, and so we each sort of like shared offices with other people, and he and I were sharing an office together. And he had gotten a project that was for a local chamber of commerce, and they wanted sort of a map with like a list of things, and you'd click on a thing and like zoom to the map, right? So it was very like JavaScripty, and the way that they had all of the things were in like had like an API with the JSON thing. And so he was like, okay, we should build this with this new thing called Vue. And I was like, okay. And at this point I'm like a junior developer. We're like knee deep in WordPress and jQuery, right? Like
yes.
that's what we're doing. And so, and this is 2016, 2017, somewhere around there. He was like, we should do this in Vue. And so like I start looking at this thing, I'm like, this makes no sense. Like none of this makes any sense whatsoever. And I start playing with it, and I'm like, but how do I do? And like I change a value and the thing just re-renders, and I went, oh. And suddenly like something clicked, and I was just like, okay, I think I get this now. And like we started doing it, and I'm sure if I was to go back and look at that code again, I would be absolutely horrified by it, because it was doing Vue on top of Google Maps can be challenging,
goodness.
which I've done this multiple times now, and I can say for a fact it is challenging. But it was one of those where the mental model for how Vue works is just sort of clicked with me of like, oh yeah, so the template is here, the JavaScript is here, and then the styling goes here. And it all just, once I got that, it was like, oh yeah, duh, right? And like just going with it. Whereas React has always looked, no offense, JSX looks like a syntax error to me.
I feel like that's putting it nicely.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the way that you like putting HTML looking tags in your JavaScript is just like, no, we've spent years teaching people not to do that because it breaks things if you do it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so like having like a dedicated template section really like worked with how my brain was working at the time. And so yeah, that's when I started doing Vue stuff, and it's kind of become what I'm really good at, I guess, is sort of the better way to put it. I've been at, I think some of my coworkers we've gone to VueConf and stuff, and I've been like, you need to take this workshop with Ben Hong or something like that. And Ben has opinions about like, oh, ref versus reactive and stuff like this. And like, you really shouldn't use reactive. Most of the time you should use ref. One of my coworkers was like, oh, if I hit a weird edge case, I'll just talk to my boss. He's like, who's your boss? Alex Revere. Oh yeah, he would absolutely know how to do like, it's one of those where like, it's just, it really, the way that Vue works with my brain. And yeah, so that's how I got into it. And I've been now doing Vue professionally for the last, what year is it? 2024?
About to be 2025.
7 years,
Isn't that
8
crazy?
years, somewhere around there. Yeah.
I actually started with Vue in version 1, I think, and then I even ventured into version 2. And the thing that I appreciated about it was when I was trying to learn React, it was like, okay, like, give me a course, give me a YouTube video, help me. With Vue, I read the documentation. I was like, oh, got it. And it was so approachable. And then I ended up kind of shifting over into React just because of the nature of the projects that I was working with, that kind of thing. It was a lot harder to pick up. And also just the APIs changed a lot. Back then it was more of the class-based stuff. Now it's all functional. Have hooks now. And anyways, the point is I have not really dove into Vue since they introduced the context API.
The composition API.
Composition, that's it. So context, I guess, is a React thing.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to hear how things changed. I do want to add in one other little tidbit just for color. One of the things that initially drew me to Vue was the fact that you didn't have to have an entire Vue application. You could just sprinkle in Vue, and the build step was a lot easier too, because I could just include JavaScript file from the CDN. I wasn't having to compile and figure out all these other things with Webpack and et cetera, et cetera. So when I say what has changed, I also wanted to ask, like, can you still do those things, or has that changed as well?
That has not changed. And in fact, that is usually when I have a couple of conference talks that I do where it's like explaining like intro to Vue, right? Like, why do we do these things? And the first example I always give is, okay, here is an HTML file, right? I am linking to some JavaScript, and here is a script tag. Let's write Vue, and we write Vue just in an HTML file, no build step, because it's designed that way. And knowing that it's designed that way informs some of the decisions as to how the templating language works specifically. For instance, you can, in JSX, when you want to use a component, you have to use like a camel case name for the component name, right? That's part of the JSX specification. In Vue, you can use a camel case name, but if you're doing it in a browser, it has to be kebab case. So that's all lowercase with a dash between each word. And you might name your component with a camel case like thing, but it'll have to be kebab case in the HTML. And the reason for that is that the way that the browser parses the DOM, when you look at what the tag is for an element, it makes it all the same case. And it just rips out any sort of like uppercase, lowercase that you have. It's all like uppercase or it's all lowercase or whatever. And so having the dashes in there as the word splitter means that Vue knows, oh, it is this component. And it's doing a lot of translations back and forth between kebab case and camel case or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, so it's one of those where it's like there's a lot of design decisions, directives. In Vue, we have directives where you can put like v dash blah, and it'll do a thing to whatever element you're on, right? You can add in like v dash focus and it'll automatically focus, right? That you only make one that does that. But we also have like v bind and v model and vif, v4 and all those things. And the reason for that is that once again, you can do v dash and the browser is able to go, oh, I know what this is, right? Like it's just it's an extra attribute. And we're not having to do like weird curly bracket things like in JSX. So
I like the little jab. So funny.
yeah.
What are some of the mental models that are different between, say, like Vue and React? Or if you even want to throw in other things like Svelte, that's fine too.
Yeah. So Vue sort of steals all of the good ideas from not steals, borrows, waits and takes all the good stuff from all the other frameworks and goes, oh yeah, that's a good idea, we should do that. And so like if a framework comes up with a good idea, Evan will look at it and go, yeah, that's smart, I like that, and we'll do it. So one of the main differences between Vue and React that is like right away immediately noticeable is in React, you're going to, call like use state or use reducer or whatever, and create, you get a value and you get a function to update the value, right? And you are manually managing like, this is the current value, and then this is the function to update it, and you have to call the right thing, and you need to make sure that you have the right scope for the function that you're calling and all of these things. And in Vue,
beautiful.
yeah, and in Vue you get you either have, like, if you're using the original options API, which is sort of the traditional way of writing a Vue component where you have like a data section and a computed section and a method section or whatever, everything is on the this object. So you would be like this dot variable name, and then if you want to change it, you just do equals new value and it just automatically updates, right? We're not having to call a function because you just use the assignment, right? Which allows you to do fun stuff like if we have a for each loop, you can just modify stuff in place. You're not having to like modify things and then spread an array into a new array so that there's a new reference so that you right, like you just change things. And it can really cut down on the amount of code that you have to write because Vue kind of magically handles all of that in the back end. Or behind the scenes. It's not in the back end, but like behind the scenes, it's doing all of that. And so like with regards to that, the other big difference between React and Vue is that React, when you write a component, you write a function, it has stuff, it returns JSX, right? And every single time that function renders, it runs that entire function. In Vue, you have a setup function when you're doing composition API. You have a setup function. That function runs once. And then every time that it needs to re-render, it uses the scope of that function to re-render the template. And so the template re-renders every single time. So you set up everything once, and then it will keep track of everything at render time. So it's a very different model of like, if you need to make a fetch call, just make a fetch call. We don't have to wrap it in something and be like, okay, but like now we have to make sure that we're in the right place to make a fetch call and do a thing. Like, no, you just make a fetch call.
Yeah.
And it's a lot less overhead of like, oh, but you're not calling the right thing here and like all of this sort of stuff. It's just, no, we just make a fetch call, like whatever. And the other way that we write Vue components now, we have a new thing called script setup. It's relatively new. It's, like 3 years old. Is it looks a lot more like Svelte, right? When I look at Svelte components, I'm like, I understand this, right? Because you're like, I'm making a value, and then that value becomes like this value, and then I'm going to set it over here, and it does a thing. And Svelte is doing all of that reactivity checking at compile time. So when you type npm build or whatever, run build, Svelte is looking at values and going, this value gets used here and here and here and here and here, and it gets updated here and here and here and here. And so here we can calculate the reactivity of that value. So when I update it over here, it's actually going to call these 4 other functions to update these, whatever. So, that's sort of the nice, not having to deal with that overhead at runtime. You're dealing with that overhead at build time. But when you write a Vue component, we now have a script setup section where rather than having to do like export default object with a setup method, and then inside of the setup method, we're doing things. You just write JavaScript. You're like import thing and import other thing, and then call that thing. And the compiler goes, okay, cool. This part is an import, so it doesn't go inside the setup function. It goes up here. And then this part, we're making our reactive value, so that's going to go inside the setup function, right? And it sort of puts everything in the right place, and then returns things as it needs to and whatnot. So it's a very different like approach, and people get really weirded out by it a little bit. And it's like, well, if you're in compiler land already, like just go ahead and lean into it. And I think like even the React team is now like, hey, what's a good idea? What if we made a compiler that did a bunch of stuff for you? And like every other framework is basically just like, yeah, that's very helpful. It's very yeah, good job, you figured it out, good job. So
that's hilarious. One of the things, because you're talking about like stuff just gets handled magically, I remember really liking how forms were handled. Because with React, you have this really weird, like controlled input, uncontrolled input. And
I hate that. I hate that so much.
I hate that for you. With Vue, you just say like what v-model, and it connects that to whatever the property is, and it will update for you based on whatever the input is. You don't even have to run a function or like say on change or any of that. It just does it.
So v-model, for those who don't know, in Vue we have a directive. So directives are attributes that you'll put on your HTML element, and v-bind is one, v-bind, and then you can say a colon and then like a value. So like if you wanted to do like v-bind colon class equals blah, right, you could then give it a string, and you could dynamically update that string as you want to, and you can change the classes on the HTML element, right? And so with, inputs and stuff like that, you can do v-bind colon value equals, and then whatever, right? And it'll take the reactive value that you have and put it into the value attribute of that element. And then to update it, you would do like v-on, which is our event listener. So v-on colon event name, so like input equals, and then update the value with the new value, right? That's a lot to write. In Vue world, that's like a lot of code to write. And so they made a directive called v-model, where basically you say, hey, if this is an input and I say v-model, when the input updates, just go ahead and update this reactive value that I'm giving you, and then just keep it in sync, right? And what's nice about, there's two things that are nice about that. One is it doesn't block the native browser implementation of stuff. So if for some reason like your Vue stuff fails, right? Like you've written a bug and your Vue app crashes or something, the form still works, right?
That's awesome.
in React land, when you make a controlled input, if your React app crashes or something like that, and you have controlled inputs and it's not able to update that value, it just stops working basically. Like it's just bad. And like the React team really had to go out of their way to make that work. Like if you go look at the code that actually makes that happen, it's ridiculous how much stuff they had to put in there to make that happen. And in the Vue world, it's just sort of like, we're going to enhance this. We're not going to you have to really, in Vue, you really have to go out of your way to make that happen. Which in my opinion is how it should work.
So let's talk a little bit about frameworks. So with React, I feel like you have the framework wars. I work at Redwood, obviously, but there's Next, Pages, there's Next App, there's Remix, there's, list all Waku. There's tons of them. And whenever I think about Vue frameworks, I'm like, there's Next, and that's it?
With Vue 2, there were a few frameworks, right?
Okay.
You all had in the React world. In the React world, you had Gatsby, right? And you had Next, and you had a couple others and stuff like that. And then Gatsby kind of fell out of favor because people were like, "This is not great." And in Vue 2, we had Nuxt 2. We also had Gridsum, and Gridsum was very much like Gatsby. And the challenge is that when the Vue 2 to Vue 3, I will not lie, Vue 2 to Vue 3 migrations suck. Like, it's not great. It's not great. It's not a great story. There's not a great, I don't have a magic, oh no, actually it's really simple. You just use this tool. It's not. It's terrible. It's a bad experience. But part of that is that every single library, basically, had the opportunity to be like, okay, cool. We're gonna, it's a huge overhaul of how reactivity works in Vue. There was a big shift in Vue 2 to Vue 3 and how the reactivity model worked. And so every single library, every single framework, everything like that was just like, cool, we're going to rewrite everything from scratch, basically. And it caused problems, suddenly Vue 3 came out officially, I think, in either 2020 or 2021. It might have been 2021. So it's been 3 years now, at least, since it came out. Nuxt was only really, really ready within the last year.
Oh, interesting.
Right? And same thing for there's a bunch of frameworks that sit on top, design component libraries and stuff like that. Quasar, Vuetify, Bootstrap ones and stuff like that. And some of them still haven't been able to be updated to Vue 3.
Interesting.
Because they were too tied into private APIs in Vue 2. And I know that GitLab is working on getting the Bootstrap Vue libraries updated to Vue 3, and it's very painful from what I've heard, because it's a pain going from Vue 2 to Vue 3. But with Vue 3, we have Nuxt now. Nuxt is great, and part of what I like about part of what's interesting about Nuxt is that Nuxt is not a runtime dependency. So I think with Remix, and probably definitely with Next, I don't know about Redwood, is that you include it in your runtime dependencies. So rather than your dev dependencies, you would include it in your dependencies in package.json. And then at runtime, it's running through whatever the thing is, right?
Sure.
With Nuxt is included as a dev dependency. And when you say Nuxt build, Nuxie build, it builds an application that uses stuff, but Nuxt there is never an import from Nuxt thing in your production bundle.
Yeah, that's Svelte, right?
Yeah,
Svelte. Yeah, generates as much JavaScript as possible and just pushes that off.
Yeah, and like so that's for the server side build, that's for the client
Mm-hmm.
side build, right? And under the hood, what Nuxt is using is that they're using a thing called Nitro Pack. Nitro Pack is used by Astro, I think, and Nuxt, and several other framework things as well, where the idea behind it is great, we're going to give you a way to write functions for, like server functions for whatever thing you're using. So if you're using Cloudflare, great, we'll output a thing that's the correct format for Cloudflare. You're using AWS, great, we're going to output a thing that's correct for AWS Lambdas, right? Oh, you're using SSR, great, we'll do something, you're using statically generated stuff, great, we'll do it a different way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so like it doesn't just do like, oh, you're tied into this system. They're really like, okay, cool, well, you write your code, we will give you an interface for how to write your code, and then we'll make sure that whatever system you're on maps to that. So you have an
Mm-hmm.
Express server, great, we'll spit it out as an Express server. And so it gets rid of the like, oh, at runtime you need to like bundle all of these things into the browser or whatever. No, you don't. It's
Mm-hmm.
all they're like, no, we don't need to be a runtime dependency, we'll just make it work.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of like meta frameworks that are smaller in Vue, where Nuxt is a nice one because it sort of only gives you what you need. So like you can make a single page application in Nuxt, and it'll give you like it won't give you Vue router. It'll give you like a little fake router so that you can like get the query parameters and get the hash parameters and all of those things, but it doesn't like do routing. It's just like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, okay, cool, we'll make sure that you have this available to you if you're using it somewhere. And I think if you're not using it somewhere, they're just like, oh, we'll just get rid of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so like suddenly, like instead of having Vue router where like maybe it adds another like, I don't know, 10 kilobytes, 20 kilobytes, suddenly you have like this like half a kilobyte thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where
Wow.
like it,
Yeah.
because it's just like, oh, you just need to be able to read in parameters and like
Mm-hmm.
update parameters, great, we'll do that. And so it's one of those where they're really good about like only giving you what you need. You don't need that much. They're also doing some stuff. Astro is another one, actually. I love Astro.
Mm.
Sorry, I love Astro. Astro is like,
There's nothing to apologize.
it's so
Astro is
beautiful.
great, and I
It's
like that you can
beautiful.
bring your own front end. So
Yeah,
you can you use React, you use Vue, you use
yeah.
Svelte, use what you want.
And yeah, so like the fact that they don't care which front end that you're using, and they sort of
Mm-hmm.
create this islands based architecture thing of like, we're going to strip out all the JavaScript until you tell us don't, is great. Like I love
Mm-hmm.
that. And Nuxt is working on a way to do that. There's another meta framework called Yields, I think.
Oh, I haven't heard of that one.
I circumflex LES use. And it's islands architecture, but I think it's Vue first. I haven't looked at it in a while, so I'm sounding very
Huh.
sus about it. But it's another one. There's another one that I think I saw recently, and I do not remember the name of it, but it's like a very minimal one where they're like,
Mm-hmm.
how minimal can we make this be? So it's a
Mm-hmm.
lot closer to like, I think, what is it, Waku or whatever it
Uh-huh.
is, where they're
Yeah.
just like, okay, strip down as much stuff as we can.
Sure. Do you even need a framework? Because like I wouldn't touch React without a framework, but do you need one with Vue?
No, because I mean, it depends on what you're doing, right?
Mm-hmm. What do
Like,
you do with your project?
um,
Do you reach for a framework?
it depends on what I'm doing.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
You're a good developer. It
So
depends.
yeah. So lately, for work, I work in a Nuxt code base, TypeScript,
Okay.
all the way, like whole hog, every feature that we can use, we're using it. But it's still client side. It all gets built into a client application that
Mm-hmm.
then gets served by a .NET application. So the
Ooh.
API is in .NET, and we're in the front end, then like sits in the static files lib folder and
Mm-hmm.
gets served. Which is great, fantastic, love that. The challenge is that like that means that there are APIs in Nuxt that it's like, no, we can't use that one. Don't use that one because that's only server side stuff, right? We can't use
Mm-hmm.
that one. And so it's an interesting place of like, there's a lot of stuff in our application that honestly we could probably just rewrite as just a Vite build thing, right? But similarly, like my personal stuff, I have Astro. My blog is in Astro, because Astro is fantastic. But I have my portfolio site is in Nuxt, and I have a solitaire game that I keep up to date. That's a Vite single page application. So like it's really just sort of like, what are you doing? Sometimes you just like import Vue into the page and then just add some stuff to it. So it's really, it's like, what are you doing with it? I know that there's integrations. Vue also has a lot of good integrations with other backends as well. So like Laravel is the big example. Laravel early on was like, if we need a front end framework, you should use Vue, right? And they've relaxed that a little bit so that you can do React or Angular or stuff like that. But I think they're still sort of championing, hey, you should use Vue.
Yeah. And they've started pushing Alpine a little bit too, I think mainly because it's coupled with Livewire, which is not, I think, as far as I understand, it's not like Laravel I mean, it's not Laravel proper. That's what I'm trying to think. It's not Laravel proper, but it is supported by Laravel. So if you do go to livewire.laravel.com, it is a subdomain. But
fun fact about Alpine.
Yeah.
Do you know how Alpine does their reactivity?
No, I don't. Is it all
the Vue reactivity system?
What? Interesting.
Vue is split out into multiple bundles, and so you can import just the reactivity system, and that's what Alpine does. That's how they do all of their reactivity.
So I learned Alpine this past year, and the thing that threw me was, and I actually asked ChatGPT. This was really helpful. I asked ChatGPT, I am primarily a React developer trying to learn Alpine. Explain to me the mental model differences to help me understand how to like adjust my thinking. That prompt, like next level unlocking for me. So I recommend that for anybody. But the big thing was, it was like Alpine is more event based, whereas React is more state data based. And once I got that, I was like, oh, this is interesting. So JavaScript historically has been more event based. And that's really what Alpine, and I think Vue, right, leans into, is more of the event system. And so you're dispatching events and listening for events, whereas React is like, once this data changes, then do this. If this piece of data or state changes, do this.
Yeah. And Vue sort of straddles the line on that, right? It's so the underlying implementation of Vue, where the magic happens, is we use proxy objects, which allows you to basically go, okay, cool, here's an object. Anytime that you try to do anything to this object, run it through this handler and let the handler figure out how to do things to that object, right?
Oh, interesting.
And so you're able to go, okay, cool, I have, here's an object, and when I update this value, right, or when I ask for this value, when I get this value, call the getter from the proxy handler and track the thing that just called it, right? And then when I update this value, just go call all the things that are being tracked by this value, right? So that's constantly, like, that is constantly updating. And so the implementation of that is basically signals, right? The signals have been very popular in frameworks recently, with like Solid and Angular switching to them and all that sort of stuff. Ultimately, like, that is what the Vue reactivity system is signal based, where it's that you're saying, hey, I'm updating this value, go call all the things that reference this. In React, the way that works, I believe, is sort of is like closer to like a use memo or something like that, where it's like, don't update this thing unless one of these values has changed.
Mm-hmm.
And in Vue, it's sort of the like only go update the things that need to be updated by
Mm-hmm.
this.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's sort of it's like a weird different mental model for how all of that
Yeah.
works. But it is once you realize that like no, you can in fact trust in the system, then like it just works.
Mm-hmm. Are you using anything for state management? I know for a while they had Vuex, which was
Yep.
like Flux. Is that
Yeah.
Flux?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's Flux. It's Flux based. Yeah.
But is that still popular? Do people still use it?
Yeah. So there is a fantastic video, and I think it was like VueConf something 2021, maybe even 2020. I don't remember, where Vue 3 was being announced. And so people were like Vuex, right? And they were like, okay, we're announcing Vuex 4, right? So in Vuex 3 was for Vue 2. Vuex 4, they're like Vuex 4 is the same API for Vue 3, right? With a
It's not
couple of
confusing
extra.
that the numbers don't
Yeah.
line up at all.
And they're like, and there's a couple of extra things, that you can do now. Like there's to make it easier for composition API, blah, 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 right? Like all of this sort of stuff. And they talked about Vuex 4 for about 10 minutes, right? Which when you're in a conference to hear about how things work in a thing, you're like, you're done? Like, that's really short. And they're like, yeah, same API. Don't worry about it. Right. And you're like, okay. And they're like, so let's talk about Vuex 5. And you're like, hold on, Vuex 4 isn't even out yet. You're just announcing it and saying that it's in beta, and you want to talk about Vuex 5. And basically what they did is that they were like, what if we get rid of the idea of like needing it to be, mutators and actions and getters and all of this sort of stuff? And what if we just simplified it, right? Ultimately, you're just tracking state. And so they start describing like, what if we can do like a function that sets everything up and you get the state, and then you can provide back methods and state much in the same way that you would have a, like a component would, right? Like sort of the same way that you would write a component. What if you could just write your stores that way too? And they start describing this API and showing things. And it was this wild divergence from how Vuex works. And they're like, so yeah, that's our idea for Vuex 5, is that that's what we're going to be moving towards, right? And so I think there was discussions and like RFCs about how this should work. And somebody started working on a project called Pina, where they were like, all right, based on that talk, let's go ahead and make this thing, right? Like let's plan this thing out. And so they started building this thing called Pina, where it's basically you make a composition function and then it wraps it in all the necessary things to have it be global state. So it only instantiates once. The next time that you call it, it uses the one that already exists, right? So you're sharing it around. It does all the necessary hooks for like server side rendering and like hydration and all of that stuff. And they kind of stopped working on Vuex 5 because they're like, this is perfect. This is exactly what we need. This is it now. This is it. There you go.
That's hilarious.
That's the new one. And
But
so yeah. And so what's great about it is that like with Pina, rather than like Vuex where like you import the entire thing all at once, right? Like any Vuex module that you have, you import it all at once, right? And there were ways of like dynamically registering and unregistering, but it was bulky and awkward and like meh. And so like you didn't want to do that. So with Pina, it's basically like, okay, cool. Pull in the ones that you need and we'll just register them on the fly for you. Don't worry about it. Like, and like once it's there, it's there. And so you're only pulling in the ones that you need at any given time. And it's a lot easier to use. So so we're using that one at work. I think I have my Solitaire app that I was talking about earlier. That's a PWA that uses Vuex still.
Okay.
And that was a example. I had people being like, can you get multiple Vue applications on a page to talk to each other and share data? And I was just like, yes, because I had done something like that at work. And I was like, here's how you make it work. And I made a solitaire game where every single pile of cards is a separate application.
Oh my goodness.
And so like they're all just working and like they know what they are supposed to do, and then they basically like dispatch an action and saying like, here is the thing that is happening to me, and then they pass that off to the place that it's going to, and the place that it's going to goes, cool, here is what I am receiving and how I'm going to interact with that.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And so it's a lot of really weird state-based classes and stuff. I don't fully like how I did it, but it works. But yeah, no. So basically I was able to make like multiple view applications on the page, and they're all working together and talking to each other. So
that's incredible.
Yeah. So
okay, so you said a couple of times on the server, on the client. And right now that's the big thing within the React ecosystem is SSR, RSC. This happens on the server, this happens on the client. Has that already existed within Vue?
So SSR has existed for forever.
Okay.
It's not because it's okay, cool. Take the DOM that we're rendering and turn it into a string. Right. And then like the hydration bit is basically like match up the IDs.
Okay.
It's that part, like they've figured that out for a very long time.
Okay.
The challenge right now that React 19 has, which I'm not allowed to make jokes about anymore because it's actually out now, is that, the React server components or whatever.
Or whatever.
I like it, that it's a very Facebook problem. You probably don't need them. But Nuxt has an implementation of some of that, where you can make a server only component. And so if you need to render it, the server will render it and deliver it to the browser. I've talked to Daniel about it. I don't fully understand it. This gets into a realm of stuff where I'm not working with that daily, right? Since I'm not doing SSR stuff usually. It gets into a weird nebulous area of like, but why? And so, but there is a way to do that in Nuxt, at least. I don't think there's like an official, like, here's the way you do this with Vue. This is like a per framework thing. Because I mean, it's the same thing with React server components of like, cool, can I do this? Like, why is this part of React if React is a client-based library? And basically they're like, oh, you need to use a framework. So, yeah.
So since we're talking about servers, what does hosting look like?
You just put it up on a host and it works.
I didn't know. Like,
it's not tied to a single hosting provider that has that is trying to lock you into their platform. I'll leave it at that.
It's very diplomatic. You know who you are.
Yeah.
That's funny. So where do you typically host your personal Vue apps?
I'm a big fan of Netlify. So I'm still on Netlify at this point. But that was the fun fact about my current job is that I have shown up in jobs before where, like, with Vue apps, because you can do such weird things with them, you show up sometimes and people are like, here's the thing that we've done. And I'm like, okay, that's a choice, right? And with my current job, that was the thing where basically, like, I showed up and he was like, here's the front end that actually works with the C# API. And I was like, oh, that's a Netlify address. Great, we're good. I know exactly how to make all of this work. And so I like Netlify because it's just sort of like I can throw things at it. And generally, they're pretty good about supporting everything that they need to and not focusing too much on proprietary things that they exclude other people from using.
Strange Cache.
Yeah.
That's the other. That's
yeah.
the other thing. I think. So Evan, who's the main guy behind Vue, just took a round of funding.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember how much he raised, but a lot
A
of it
bunch.
goes into tooling. I know
Yes.
Tom Preston Warner,
Yeah.
my
So
funder as well, has invested in these Vue tools. What is the
yes.
benefit of that? That's all I
Yeah.
know.
So, all right. So let's talk about Void Zero. Void Zero is Evan Yu's new company.
Okay.
I have not talked to Evan about this personally. I have heard multiple interviews, and part of what he was looking for by doing this is that there is a funding model that works to a certain point with JavaScript frameworks. So Vue will still be funded primarily by Evan Yu's Patreon, right?
Interesting.
And Vue is not being owned by Void Zero or anything like that. It is still an Evan Yu and Vue community thing.
Okay.
Vite,
Like he owns it?
I mean, he's the benevolent dictator for life.
Okay.
I mean, he is.
It's like the Taylor Otwell or
Yeah.
Otwell. Okay. Got it.
Yeah, Guido van Rossum was the Python one for a while, and at some
Okay.
point with the walrus operator, he kind of was like, "I'm done," and that was a whole controversy. That was years ago. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But basically, he reached a point where the funding model for Vue, like he's kind of reached the limit of what you can do funding wise, the way that he's been doing funding, and the problem currently in the ecosystem that literally everybody is trying to solve, it seems like, is build tools. And there have been previous projects and companies trying to solve this. Rome is one of them, right? Where Rome was like, we made Babel, so we know what we're doing, and we're going to start from scratch and do a bunch of build tools, right? And nothing came out of it. That you have Biome now, which is like a linter. And Evan is like, okay, so they started with a linter, which adds no value to, like, it's nicer for developers, but it adds no value ultimately to what you're doing. And so if you're going to start with build tools, start with build tools. And Void Zero is now basically in charge of Vite. And Vite is a collection of tools, right? It's a collection of tools working together to orchestrate faster builds, because basically, like, the problem with Webpack was it's written in JavaScript, very complicated. And so the bigger your project gets, the more that it's written in JavaScript shows, right? It slows down considerably. And so, we had back in the Webpack days, we would have 5 to 10 minute builds, and you'd just be like, well, I'm just going to go get a cup of coffee, make a stir fry, bake a souffle, like whatever. And so he was like, no, we can do better. And so right now he's using, I think under the hood, Vite is using Rollup. Yeah. Rollup.
Oh, interesting.
For the builds, and ES build for the dev server. So ES build is written in Rust. Am I getting this right? I think I am. ES build is written in Rust. And part of why the Vite compiler stuff is so fast is that rather than trying to bundle everything on every single change that you make, he just, you're on localhost talking to localhost. So just make everything be an ES module and then just import it all in the browser, right? So in development, if you go look at the network requests for JavaScript and stuff on a Vite build and you have a large project, it'll be like thousands of files that are being downloaded because it's just like, oh yeah, just like turn them all into that and then deliver them and let the browser do its thing. Whereas at build time, you're like, I don't want that. I want to bundle everything, right? And so that's why you shouldn't run a Vite dev server in production, is because they're doing two completely different things. And so the goal of Void Zero is to build better tooling that can manage all of this. So working with the people who built ESBuild, working with the people who built Rollup. They're going to build a tool called Rolldown. Rolldown is going to be Rollup, but written in Rust, right? So rather than Rollup is written in JavaScript, TypeScript, whatever. And you hit a point where, once again, same as Webpack, you hit that, like, there is only so fast that JavaScript can go doing this type of stuff. And you need to take it into another programming language. And so all of the tooling that's like the low level Rust stuff is what Void Zero is doing, is that they're like, we're going to build this tooling and we want to make standard tools. So as opposed to like, oh, you're going to be locked into our implementation of this thing, they're going to be like, cool, here's the API, right? Here's how the API should be structured. Here's how all of these things are. So we're going to build a Rust-based AST parser, right? Which is the abstract syntax tree. And so like, here, we'll parse things out into this AST for you really fast. And then another thing can consume that really fast, right? But they're making it so that like, oh, you want to enhance this thing? Great. Let's talk about how to enhance it, right? So that it's not just a don't build tools just for Vue. It's a build tools for the ecosystem, build tools for everybody that everybody can use. And then the monetization portion of it, he hasn't really publicly discussed actual plans, but generally speaking, it's like, okay, cool. We're going to then offer a service that you can pay for that will do all of this stuff really fast, right? Like that's the goal, right? And like, you know, support and all of that sort of stuff. But like the actual tooling part of it is the like, let's make sure that it's tools that can be used by everybody. So in the same way that like Vite was originally a Vue only tool when it first came out, it is now but like, what are you building with it, right? Like, do you want Angular? Do you want TypeScript? Do you want Vue? Do you want React? Do you want, you know, solid, whatever? Like, it has a way to do that. And so that's sort of the goal of the project, is to kind of like continue that idea of like, let's build something. And so part of the reason why I think it'll work a little bit better is that there's already a tool, right? We're not starting from scratch. We have a tool. It exists. Things are using it already. The other part of it is that the reason that he's taken the money like this way is that he needs to be able to pay for Rust developers, basically. This can't just be okay, cool. Well, like here's an extra couple of $100, like thanks for the like 5 weeks of work, right? Like it needs to be here is a paycheck. And he was very clear in the interviews I've heard about like, here's like, I specifically looked for funders that understood what it is that we are doing. And I specifically did not want somebody who was like, I am just here to make a quick buck. Right. So he didn't take money that he took his time, found somebody who was the correct somebody to fund this. And it sounds reasonable. So that's sort of the skinny on it. I am, there's a great interview that he did on Deja Vu, which is a Vue podcast, where it's him talking about Void Zero, and sort of he goes through a lot more detail about all of this stuff.
That's awesome.
So I would recommend, if anybody is interested, that is the one I would go listen to.
Sweet. We can link to that in the show notes. Well, I think that covers everything that I had listed out. Is there anything that I'm missing that you think, oh man, people need to know this?
I mean, how much time do we have? So the big thing that's coming in Vue that I don't know how much time we have, but I'll try and cover it very quickly. Is and I don't know when this is coming out. I know that they've been working really hard on it, and they have some technical demos of it. Let's back up. Do you know about Solid.js and how Solid.js works?
I know about Solid. I don't know how it works.
So Solid.js is a framework that when you write it, it looks a lot like React. And it uses signals
Mm-hmm.
as is popular at the moment. And you create a thing that is going to be tracked, and then you can like update that thing. And then you write a template in JSX. And what Solid does is that rather than like rendering a virtual DOM, in its function, it doesn't actually make a render function.
Interesting.
Which, yeah, so like already you're like, what?
Mm-hmm.
It runs the function and then it pulls out the HTML elements, so actual references to the HTML elements. And then it looks and says, okay, cool, this value, when this value gets updated, what HTML is it touching? What things are it touching? And it will then create essentially like a watch thing in use effect in React or whatever it is, where it's okay, when this value changes, run this function, right? So when this value changes, update this HTML element. And so you're suddenly like, okay, cool. I don't have to rerun the entire function. I just have to run that one watch statement and change that element, right? So as opposed to like React with like they track 2 virtual DOMs and then they like swap them out, like whatever. With this, it's just like, no, we just go like touch the DOM directly. No virtual DOM.
Yeah.
But
I'm sure it's faster too, right? Because you're not re-rendering everything.
I tried to explain to someone why you wouldn't do a thing in Tailwind, like whatever. I was trying to explain why Tailwind is bad and how it's more inefficient than just like doing it like the CSS way. And I tried to make an example, but they were using Solid and I didn't understand what Solid was doing at the time. So I wrote the thing in Solid and I couldn't make it slow enough to properly explain I had to put like 100 million elements on the page and then attempt to do something to all of them before it was like, okay, cool. Yes. The CSS way would take like half a second and then this takes like a full second. Great. And I was just like, what is this? And then I started reading about it. I'm like, oh, okay, this makes more sense. It's specific to the thing that I was trying to do. Is like, oh yeah, no, it's really fast at that. And so all of that is to say, so Solid.js, very cool. Go look into it. Vue, Evan, we'll say it like it is. Evan, once again, has been like, oh, that's a good idea. And we are making, the core team is working on Vue Vapor mode, where it will take a Vue template and a Vue setup function and do that. So it'll say, okay, cool, you have this reactivity thing and you have this HTML element and this reactive value applies to this HTML element. Great. No render function. We're just going to like watch that value and then update the HTML element. And so it gets rid of the virtual DOM completely, which is wild. It's going to break so many things. It's going to be great. It's going to be another great time. But they have it off in like a separate repo right now where they're trying to be like, let's make sure that we can make this work. And they've gotten most of it. I haven't checked up on it recently, but I'm pretty sure I think they're doing some announcements about it in January. So I will be looking out for those.
Yeah.
But it's going to be wild. 'Cause like however fast if whatever benchmarks you have for like how fast Vue is currently, be prepared. It's going to get even faster.
That's amazing. So if this conversation, somebody's like, I'm totally bought in on Vue, I want to check it out. Where do you recommend for somebody to get started?
Vue.js.org.
Okay. I've read through the documentation. It's very readable. I know there is school. I think it's called School of Vue or
there's Vue School. Yeah, there's Vue School. Vue School has a lot of good resources. The other one that I always recommend if you're really like, let me invest in something, is Vue Mastery. If only because I know a bunch of the people over there. Both Vue School and Vue Mastery both have fantastic courses and articles. And I can highly recommend both of them. I know that I have benefited even in my like advanced knowledge, I've benefited from reading and going through some of their stuff. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I was thinking View School did a conference.
Mhm.
When was that? Last May, right?
maybe.
That was like just a front end conference. They're like, we're going to bring everybody together. I think that was in May. Anyways, or maybe it was June. But we were on a panel with them.
Oh,
where we were
nice.
just talking about, the future of front end. And I think we had, in our case, like a lot of the meta frameworks were represented on the React side. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Cool. Well, let's go into the next section of the show where we do picks and plugs. We pick something that we like and we plug something generally that we've worked on. Do you have any picks and plugs?
So
I'm unprepared.
I will go slowly then. My pick for this week. No, my pick is oh shoot, what's it called? I think last time I picked Dropout TV's
Yes.
Gastronauts. Well, they have a new show. Amy, do you like Mythbusters?
Yes.
What if Mythbusters tried to answer questions that nobody asked? So the new show on Dropout is called Nobody Asked, and it's answering questions like, can you recreate a work of art with a sharpshooter paintball gun?
What? That's amazing.
Yeah. And just questions of that caliber.
Did they do it?
I don't think the sharpshooter part that you have to get, there were a few complications, but they mostly did, I would say.
That's
so,
creepy.
But yeah, it's, does wearing clown shoes affect soccer athletes?
That's awesome.
Yeah, important questions that nobody asked. And I the first episode is out, and I highly recommend that. It was quite delightful.
That's awesome. I'll have to check that out.
And then what are plugs? That's a difference.
It's like you could say, usually it's something that you've worked on. So if you have a social handle or
got it,
you want to plug your company or somebody else's. So
my plug is once again Code Mash. Code Mash is coming up in January. I don't know when this episode is coming out. So if this episode comes out before January 14th and you are in or near the Ohio area, I highly recommend coming. It's a fantastic conference, and it is top tier people. I hear that there's a really attractive guy that's going to be talking about Vue for React developers. Yeah. Beautiful blue hair. So
that is is it the same talk you've given at that conference?
Probably. Yeah.
It is one of my most favorite talks that I've heard at a conference. Yes. Loved it.
I think I have like 3 weeks to update it because React 19 is out now and I have to go like, what are all the new things?
Oh, well, so for anybody listening, I'll tease this a little bit more. You might change it, but you initially said, I can make Vue look like React. Or wait, I can make Vue look React or vice versa.
Yeah. It's that we go through, we take a React component that's like a to-do list, and we step by step turn it into a Vue component, and I break down exactly what we're doing and why we're doing it. And at the end of it, you're like, that looks like a React component, and I'm like, but it's Vue. It's JSX
and then you said,
Vue.
Let's actually make it look like Vue.
And then we turned it into an actual Vue application so that it looks like Vue.
Yeah, it was quality. I appreciate it. So I'm going to pick, I think I've actually picked this before, but it has been a long time. I used it this morning. Vue used Whoosh. This is some of the best screen cleaner that I've ever used. And the nice thing is it comes with this particular thing that I have is it has a little section on the bottom for the cloth. You can pull that out, spray, wipey wipe. But this is really good for cleaning your screen. So I always, whenever I get ready to travel, I always notice how dirty my laptop is just because I feel like other people are going to be looking at my laptop and judging how nasty it is. So I usually clean it. We're getting ready to travel with the holidays and everything like that. So cleaned it up this morning. But yeah, it's quality. They also have just regular wipes that I've heard. I think Wes Boss described him as like the Norwex for computer screen cleaning, but I do like this because it has the spray. The spray does work really well.
Nice.
Sometimes the wipes, I just feel like you're smearing, but yeah, it's good.
I might have to look into that.
Yeah, it's good. I think I was like, if I was going to see you, I'd just give you one of the wipes because I bought like a pack of 10. But anyways, for the plug, if you are, by the time this goes out in audio form, this will have closed, but it's okay. I'll still plug it anyways. I'm running the advent of JavaScript and the advent of CSS. So you can still join, even though it is themed for Christmas. The challenges themselves are not all Christmassy themed. So just jump in there. I have people that actually join year round just because they want some challenges and want to have designs for working with code things and challenging leveling up and stuff like that. So you can use Vue, you can use React, you can use vanilla JavaScript, you can use Tailwind, you can use regular CSS. So I also think it's a good way to say, like, if you've been wanting to experiment with a new technology, to say, I'm going to make this a little bit more challenging for myself, and this is what I'm going to use for this particular day's challenge. So go check it out. Like I said, not too late to sign up at adventofjs.com and adventofcss.com. Cool. I think that's it. This has been a fun hour. Alex, it's always a pleasure.
Yeah. I'm always happy to come on.
Sweet. If you're listening in the audio version of the show, please, or even if you're not, please go leave a rating and review. That just helps other people like you find the show, helps us bring on great guests and get additional sponsors. So we would appreciate that. But for now, that's all we got. Amelinite is a frequent user in the chat, and they asked, one of the things that they really like about Laravel and Adonis is that there is a CLI, and was just curious why other frameworks like Vue, React, Svelte don't have that. I know Redwood has a CLI. I feel like there have been additional things that people have added on for CLI stuff.
Vue technically has a CLI. There's the Vue CLI command that you can use. React had a CLI, create React app.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I think Svelte, I don't know what Svelte has. I haven't used Svelte enough to know if they have one or not.
So the difference I think with Svelte is if you're using Svelte or Svelte Kit, and a lot of times those almost get merged together. Yeah. So Svelte Kit is the thing that you get a router with. You can build pages and stuff like that. And there is a build command, but that's all running like through NPM. It's not like when I think of Laravel, it's like, I'm going to run PHP artisan, make this file for me.
Right.
So
and
it's a little bit different.
I think part of it is that with Laravel is very, very opinionated on purpose. Like that's by design. And because it's like Laravel is built on top of PHP, and so Laravel is going to go, okay, cool. You will put models over here, and you will put views over here, and you will do right. Like you have to do it that way. And in Vue, React, and Svelte, I think that they're a little bit more like, I don't know, just point it at a file. We'll figure it out later. Like, whatever, right? Like, it's way less opinionated than like Laravel or Adonis is, where they're like, they've got very strong opinions about how things should go. And part of that is, that adds to the flexibility of being able to do weird things. So like Vue, React, and Svelte would not have like a command line to do that sort of stuff. Nuxt has Nuxy, which allows you to like add plugins and stuff like that, and is how you do like the build and the type checking and all that sort of stuff. And I would imagine that Next has something. It sounds like Redwood has something. So once you get into like the JavaScript meta frameworks, I think that's where you start getting more stuff that's like opinionated about like, here's where you put pages. Yeah, it's absolutely a matter of opinion because you'd have to configure it otherwise.
And I was going to say, I hate the semantics of like, is it a framework? Is it a library? I think that's also kind of the nuance with your question is you're talking about Laravel and Adonis, which are frameworks or meta frameworks. And then you have Vue, React, Svelte. That's like also comparing PHP in that instance. So that's one of the reasons why things like Redwood can say we have a CLI because this is where we're going to force you to put your pages and your components. What's interesting is Brad, who's not here today, That makes him sound like he's dead. I don't know. He
He's
has
no
other
longer with us today.
Brad, one of the things he likes to do is create starter kits for a
Yeah.
lot of these frameworks so that when he's working, he can create his own command line tools to be
Yeah.
able to do stuff like that. And I'm not sure what he's currently using, but I know in the past he's used plop.js, which I'm a huge fan of in terms of automating. And he'll use plop to create a lot of those templates that you're talking about. So like in his remix project, he has a command where he can just run it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, this looks great. I know that in previous projects, I've used Hygen, which is a JavaScript one.
Yeah.
There used to be a package that was maintained by Chris Fritz, and now I think Ben Hong has taken it over and it's changed a little bit. But back in the Vue 2 days, there was a package called Vue Enterprise Boilerplate, where it was opinionated about like components go here and here's the structure for them, and pages go here and here's the structure for them. And Chris had made a bunch of templates so that you could be like, create new component, and it would spit out a component file, a test file, and a storybook file for you.
That's exactly what Redwood does.
And so like I've seen that tooling built, but it's usually that you need something else to like force that structure on top of the library. It's the difference between like Ruby and Ruby on Rails is the other sort of similarity there too, where like Ruby on Rails is the thing where you can be like, great, migrate all the stuff, right? And like it just does it. And like Ruby would be like, I don't know what that is. So yeah.
If you're interested in looking at plop, I'll see if I can find a link. So I have on my GitHub, I'm using plop on my computer to help keep all the compressed podcast stuff organized. So like, for example, after today's show, I will download the audio feed, all the WAV files for this. And on my computer, I'll just run CFM live. And what that does is then it'll ask me, what's the episode number for today? And I'll say based on your current directory structure, it should be like 216 or something like that. And I'll say, yep, that sounds good. And then I'll say, okay, who's the guest, or how do you want to refer to this? And so I'll type in Alex, Vue, and it'll create all those folders for me. And then I can just drop the files in there. So everything is structured. But it makes it really easy because I don't have to go in and do that. I also use plop to say, hey, go ahead and generate the base show notes for today. And so if we had a sponsor, I can go through the list and select what sponsor. It'll add those to the show notes for me and create that template for me to be able to add stuff to. So plop is pretty powerful, especially in the ways that you can extend it.
And it has like TypeScript support.
Here, I'm going to find this and I'll share it in the chat.
Yeah. Oh, you may have just solved a problem for me at work.
Yes. But one of the things that I like about plop, I'll just keep talking about it, is, for example, with the compressed repo that I just shared, I have a folder in there called plop-templates. And that's really the folder that it copies and pastes. So if I ever wanted to make a change, then I just change whatever files are in that folder. I don't even have to write any additional code. It'll just say, oh, this is the template. Got it. I'm going to copy and paste it.
Nice.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for hanging out in the chat. Happy holidays. We will not be recording again until after the new year. So see you in 2025.